Morning. Are you living the dream or are you living the life? Are you living the dream or are you living the life? Living the dream probably has meaning to those of us living in this country. We've talked about it. You hear it over the years. You hear about living the dream. Think about maybe the American dream. Maybe you think about your own dream. Living the dream. What am I working towards? What am I using all of my energy to bring about? What is it I'm hoping for? You step back for a minute and you say, well, what is a dream? What is a dream? You can say, well, it's when I go to sleep and I have dreams at night. Yeah, but that's not the kind of dream we're talking about, right? What is the dream that we're talking about when we say living the dream? It's what we hope for, right? It's kind of what we're looking toward down the road. We're thinking, man, I'm living the dream. I'm experiencing all the good things. I'm experiencing the success, but I'm working toward a time when I don't have to work. I'm working toward a time when I'm doing nothing but enjoying the dream. That's what living the dream is. I can just enjoy and reap the rewards of all of what I've done, right? So living the dream, now if you disagree with me, just shout it out. You got something else you want to add to that? Living the dream, what does that mean to you? Because it's important as we go forward and we look at the story out of Scripture we're going to talk about this morning, living the dream. But I asked you the first question, are you living the dream or are you living the life? I probably don't get asked that question very often, right? Are you living the life? What life? I'm alive. What does that mean? Are you living the life? Before we came on this morning for the sermon, welcome, by the way, those of you who are joining us by video, I asked those gathered here today to take a look at the cross that's behind me, to pay attention to that cross, to the way it looks now, and for those of you who were here last Sunday, what maybe has changed about it? Has anything changed? What about the cross stands out today? Okay, so I've asked you several things I want you to hold on to. Are you living the dream or are you living the life? Obviously, an implied difference. Let me invite you to turn in your scripture, if you have it with you this morning in the Bible. Turn to the Gospel of John. We were in John last week looking at Jesus' resurrection because it was Easter. We're looking at resurrection again today, but we're not just looking at Jesus's. Today we're going to go back. So I invite you to back up a little bit in John, and today we're going to look at chapter 11. It's the story of Lazarus. It's the story of Mary and Martha. It's the story of good friends of Jesus, people that he loved. It's a story that is rich in meaning, rich in implication, rich in application. There's a lot in this story. You may remember it. Maybe you've heard it before. Jesus had these three friends, and they lived in Bethany, which was not too far outside of Jerusalem. Lazarus, Mary, Martha, two sisters and a brother. They were friends of Jesus. And Lazarus had become sick. Now, Martha and Mary knew that it was important to get word to Jesus because they knew he loved Lazarus and he had the power to heal him. So they sent word to Jesus. Hey, the one you love, Lazarus, he's sick. We pick it up there because in verse 4 it says, when he heard this, meaning Jesus, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. This sickness, the one that Lazarus has, will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. That's kind of like, you know, a kid coming up and saying, hey, can I have whatever it is that he's asking for or she's asking for? And the parent giving a lecture on how we ought to be satisfied with what we have. And the kid's just thinking, I just asked for, let's say, a piece of candy. Why do I get this long, convoluted answer? I'm sure the apostles, the disciples, had to be sitting there listening. You were just brought word that your good friend, somebody you love, is dying, is sick. And you say this sickness will not end in death? It's for God's glory that God's Son may be glorified through it. What? I would imagine the followers of Jesus had that experience a lot. What are you talking about? Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister Lazarus, and so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he did what? He immediately took off and went, right? Because he loved them. And he got this word, and so surely he just, whatever he was doing, important, but he set it aside because he needed to divert the route, right? He needed to change plans. He needed to go immediately and provide healing. Because the scriptures, the Gospels are full of stories of Jesus healing. So it says exactly what you would expect. So when Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Does yours say that? And then he said to the disciples, let's go back to Judea. Now there is a short passage here that follows that talks about the discussion that's going on between Jesus and the disciples about going back to a place where they were pretty rough on Jesus before. And it's an important story, but it's not what we're focusing on today. So I want to invite you to skip down to the place where Jesus arrives. He arrives in Bethany. We're in verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. I want you to catch up with where we are here. Jesus' good friends, Mary and Martha, sent word to him that their brother, another of his good friends, was sick. They sent word to the healer, he's sick. Come, Lord, in other words, come now to heal him. And Jesus gives this cryptic answer that this sickness won't end in death. It's for God's glory. And then he stayed there for 2 more days. And upon arrival, he finds that Lazarus, the good friend, is dead. And had been in the tomb already for 4 days. Now, obviously, you got to allow, and time-wise, you got to allow some time for travel. They're walking, so it took some time to get there. But he was already dead and in the tomb. Jesus didn't have 2 days to wait. Lazarus is dead. And there's a lot of mourning going on. Martha and Mary are crushed, as you can imagine. Their brother is dead, and the one who had the power to heal him is late. He didn't get there in time. Now, word had already spread around, and Jews from Jerusalem nearby had come over to help mourn, and they were grieving, and it was part of the culture. So the whole atmosphere is filled with grief and mourning and death. You can feel the whole tone of the story just sink. Oh no, you're too late. When Martha heard, I'm in verse 20, when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Imagine how Martha's feeling. This is the one who can heal. This is the one she respects. This is the one that loves them and she loves him. And even though he's already dead and you're late getting here, God can do. In fact, God will do whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. I imagine Martha just kind of resigns herself inside. Because her answer says, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. I know Jesus. I know. Maybe as if to say, it's okay, I know you're late getting here. I know he'll rise again. The teachings had been taught. They knew that God had promised resurrection for all people who follow him. All of God's people would be resurrected in the end. And Martha's simply saying, yeah, I know, Jesus. I know that in the end, he'll be resurrected. And Jesus says this, very common in Christian circles. It's probably one of the best known passages out of John because we hear it almost every funeral you go to, every Christian funeral. You hear this repeated. You can probably say it with me if I started it. Jesus answered, or Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Yeah, I'm watching it. I didn't even finish the whole quote. It's just the first sentence, and some of you are mouthing the rest of the words. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Now, some translations say, and whoever lives and believes. Or, and whoever living and believing in me will never die. It's the living and the believing that he's making the point of. Will never die. Even though they die, yet they will live. And then he asks her, do you believe this? Sure, Lord, she replied, yes. I believe that you're the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside and tells Mary to come too, because Jesus has asked for her and wants to talk with her. The setting here is one of grief and mourning. And Martha has gone out to talk to the one who can heal and said, he's already dead, but God will answer you, whatever you ask. And then Jesus shifts to the end of time and says, he will rise again. And she says, yeah, I know. Almost as if to say, but I was hoping he'd live again now. I know we, your people, I know we'll all raise up again. We'll be raised up again in the resurrection. But Jesus, I was hoping he would live now. I was hoping you'd heal him and return him to us. And Jesus gives this passage that we use at almost every Christian funeral. I am the resurrection and the life. The thing you're waiting on at the end of time, I am. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Now, if you skip all the way down to 38, I'm skipping over the passage of the conversation between Mary and Jesus to come back to the exchange with Martha. And Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. Now, you may need a little help. It certainly made a difference for me when I understood that this deeply moved experience that Jesus is having, that's true. But to really get at what he's feeling, you got to go back a verse. When some of the crowd around, some of the Jews said, could not he have opened the eyes of the blind man? Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? They too are wondering, what's the deal? And then it says Jesus was once more deeply moved. How was he moved? In what way was he moved? What emotion is Jesus feeling? Sometimes language is hard to translate, and if you read different translations, you get the idea that this deeply moved experience that Jesus is feeling is actually anger. He's ticked off. He's not ticked off at Martha. He's not ticked off at Mary. He's not ticked off at the people around him. He's ticked off at death. He's ticked off because of the mourning and grief that people he loves are feeling because of this nasty thing called death. You ever been to a funeral? You ever lost a loved one? Have you ever been mad at death that robbed your loved one from the life that you were enjoying with them? If you had the opportunity at the moment, would you say to Jesus, please come and heal? Maybe you've said that in your prayer. Maybe you too have wondered, Lord, you healed so many people in the scripture. Do you not do that anymore? Lord, you brought people back from the dead in the scripture. Do you remember Jairus' Jairus' daughter? Do you remember the official son? Jesus raised both of them from the dead. Does he not do that anymore? Jesus is angry at death. That's what's going on in this passage. That's what's deeply moved him, because he realizes the effect that death has had, which came about from our sin, on not just these people, but everybody. Jesus, too, is really ticked off at the losses we suffer in the response to death. And then he says, take away the stone. And Martha, of course, protests, because this is not the first death Martha has been around. Lord, she says, by this time there's a bad odor. He's been in there for 4 days. Flesh out the conversation. Imagine how Martha's feeling. Oh my goodness. Imagine what she's thinking. Not only are we grieving, not only is this awful that he's died, not only did you not get here in time, but he's already started to decompose. I mean, all of them that are gathered around, you're going to roll that stone back, and now it's going to be an awful stench. Lord, this is going from bad to worse. And Jesus said to Martha, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? That's a quote from earlier in chapter 11. Where Jesus said to the disciples, this sickness will not end in death. Remember? No, it is for God's glory. Somehow what has happened to Lazarus is for God's glory. And Jesus is getting ready to show us how. The end of this part of the story for our point today, for this message today, is that Jesus then stands back. He stands back after looking up in heaven and says, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus, come forth. And then what they hoped for comes about. Lazarus emerges from the tomb, and he's alive. Now, he's still wrapped up. He obviously was dead. He's wrapped head to toe in the burial cloths. Jesus has to ask somebody to unwrap him. What's going on in this story? And what does it have to do with the question that I asked you? Are you living the dream or are you living the life? Friends, dreams are things we hope will happen. Dreams are things we work toward to help bring them about. Dreams are things that may or may not come true. You know the proverbial story of the man or woman. It's often told of a man who spent his whole life working day and night all the time, living for retirement. He's working for retirement. And he's hoping to get there so that he can fully enjoy the rest of life. And some tragedy happens and he dies right after retirement or right before retirement, and he never gets there. That's the effect of a dream that doesn't materialize, right? And yet many of us live the dream. In this situation, Jesus is talking to God's own people, his friend and a person that he loved, Martha, and he says he's going to rise again, and once again she points to the hope of the dream. Yes, Lord, I know that in the resurrection, he'll live. Down the road, he will live. And Jesus says, I am the resurrection and I am the life. When I asked you if you're living the dream or are you living the life, it's because that's what Jesus asks each of us. Are you living something that you're hoping for down the road? Or have you encountered the living Lord? Have you encountered the living Jesus who not only rose at Easter, but he's still alive today? He's still at work today. He's still at work in your life and my life. And he says to us that if we know him, if we live with him, believing and living with him, we will experience the dream now. Not the kind of dream that we talk about, the American dream. He doesn't promise any kind of material blessings or a rose garden, so to speak. He simply says that if you believe in me enough to live with me, live according to my way, live believing that I have overcome death and I have the power to give you life that won't end, it will change the way you live. It will change the way you live. Imagine how that circle of people lived in the next few days and weeks and months after watching a dead man come out of the tomb. I imagine they reflected on Jesus' words and took them a little differently than they had before. I imagine it made them wonder about possibilities they'd never considered. This is not the end of time. This is right now. And Lazarus is alive. I wonder how your life would change this afternoon and tomorrow and next week if this cross for you didn't just point to the end of time or the end of your life when you're raised again into heaven. I asked you to pay attention to the cross. It's not just a wooden cross. There's greenery around it. Greenery represents life, right? Now, I know those are artificial, but if you just think for a minute, what does it mean for life to be coming out of a cross? What does it mean for a place where death has been, that life is now growing? Friends, if we believe that Jesus is the resurrection, and by believing that right now we can have life forever, that the life we're living has meaning for the rest of eternity. It's not like this life goes on and ends and then we are raised into some new life. We join that life now. What does that mean? Well, I can't explain all the different particulars to you. But what I can tell you is what Jesus has revealed to us. The power of the resurrection that raises us to life at work in us. The power of God at work in us enables us to live in ways we never dreamed possible. It enables the power of God to come through us to affect change around us for his purposes now, not just in heaven. What does that look like? What would it look like for you and me if Easter was not just a celebration, but it was a change in the way we live? It was a change in how we take our belief and live it out. Said differently, if you knew for a fact that your life's not going to end, what would you do differently this coming week? How would you use your time? If you no longer had to worry about, well, I don't really have time for this. It's important, but if I don't finish that, how would you live differently? The resurrection of Jesus offers us a a new way of approaching life, a new way of living it out. When we get up in the morning, pray to God about the things that are important today, the things that are important in the lives of loved ones, the things that are important in the place you're going to go and spend your time, at school or at work or wherever. When you know for a fact that the power that raised someone from the dead is alive and at work in you, it's a whole different outlook. And it's a whole different possibility for the way you pray. When we look at the cross and we see life coming out of it, when we realize that we can live life, forever life, now, you know, the life we talk about in heaven, the power that is available to us becomes a real possibility. How do you realize that? How does that become real in your life? Well, I ask you the question that Jesus asked Martha. Do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus is alive today and with you, even though you can't see him? Do you believe that Jesus is alive and with you and he's paying attention to what you're paying attention to? Do you believe that Jesus is alive today with you? And if you ask to see what he sees and ask him to do through you what he wants done, it makes this life entirely different than just trying to work through your days to accomplish something for later.